much. I want to bring in Eurasia Group President Ian Bremmer. Ian, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining the conversation.
Good morning, my pleasure.
Trump continues this top surge. Clinton continues to slide. Where is this headed? How do you see it?
Populism in the United States is growing. The anti-establishment sentiment, which we've seen so much in Europe over the course of the last years, is starting to actually rear its head in the United States. People don't like the fact that it's going to be $5 to $10 billion spent on this election. I think when you talk to a lot of Americans, they basically say, yeah, you know, he may be non-PC, but we know he's not bought. And I mean, the fact that even Republican women, 33% right now say they support Trump, as opposed to 31% of Republican men, it's not about his policies. It's about the fact that they really don't like establishment politicians. I don't believe that we're going to be seeing him as the nominee, certainly, but I think he is really affecting the way people think about the American political process.
And he gets as much interest from the Republican side, or almost as much, as on the Democratic side.
Oh, that's right. And again, we're going to have a debate in 2 days' time, and I have no doubt whatsoever that it's going to be the highest ratings that CNN has ever seen for a debate. He came out just a couple weeks ago and wrote an open letter to the head of CNN saying, these ratings are because of me, so you should be donating the additional cash to the veterans.
Yeah, I wonder if Jeff Zucker thought of that.
It's not been responded to so far. But again, a very smart move, and people are talking about it, right? We want to report on this because otherwise it's not very interesting yet. This is entertainment, and we like it.
Well, one thing, Keith McCullough, is that he's really energizing this election. I mean, people are coming out when you consider the fact 24 million people watched the Fox debate.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, is it energy or is it I'm not a politician? I think it's probably both. But if she's saying, look, you have no energy and you're a politician, you're probably a dud. I think that's kind of the main takeaway. The question I had more for Ian was, the learnings of Europe. They've actually gone hard left. Now that they've had, this kind of uprising that you've had in Greece, the Spanish election, you're seeing the lefties start to rise. Do you think that a leftist could win this U.S. election as opposed to Trump?
Certainly, if you look at the electoral math in the United States, you look at the way the Electoral College works, it's much more likely still that a Democrat's ultimately going to win than a conservative. If you ask me if that Democrat were Bernie Sanders, the answer would be no. And let's keep in mind, in Europe, right, Syriza actually won, right? But that's because Greece had a depression, an actual depression. In every other country in Europe, you have some anti-establishment candidates that have picked up a lot of force. Jeremy Corbyn, just over the weekend, this socialist Labour Party winner, won 60% of the Labour vote. He now has absolutely no chance of becoming prime minister. Labour has become unelectable. And so I think what is more likely in the United States is that as fringe candidates become more significant, they undermine their parties. And that will be true on both left and right. We only have a two-party system. In many countries in Europe, they have far more, so they can get some noise. They can be a part of a coalition government.
So quickly, Ian, when you say, going back to what you said earlier about Trump, you said most certainly he's not going to be the GOP nominee. I think people are are falling in that camp and do believe that he won't be the nominee, are trying to figure out when is that going to happen. I mean, if he's surging in the polls still, what happens between now and then that things change in the GOP race?
I think it happens incrementally. I don't think he's going to make a statement that suddenly everyone says, oh, now we think he's a buffoon. I think we're done with. We know he's a buffoon, but that's okay, right? I think what happens is, one, big money starts being spent against him. We haven't seen that happen. More candidates drop.
For instance, who? I mean, Jeb Bush.
Jeb Bush. Okay. But more candidates start dropping out. A few establishment candidates start actually getting significant pop, and then you start seeing the attack ads that really go up. But right now, big money that supports the Republican Party, they don't know who they're supporting yet in the race. You still have 16 people, 15 of whom look like munchkins. That's going to change in a couple months, right? We won't add a silly
What does the Dem side look like to you?
The Dem side looks to me, well, first of all, we have to see if Biden's running. And I did think that Colbert last week, very compelling interview with him.
Emotional, huh?
Didn't seem like Biden is setting himself up for the big run. I think the question is not whether Hillary gets the nomination or not because she's going to lose support. It's, is she indicted? And there are a lot of people, including in the White House, who believe an indictment's possible. I heard from one quite senior person that said, if I did what Hillary did, I think I'd be in jail.
Wow.
And I think that's the open question is as a consequence, do we have a completely open Democratic race at the last minute because she was a candidate and then she isn't? But otherwise, her numbers are not going to soften enough for Bernie Sanders to win.
When was the last time you were in Europe?
was just about 5 weeks ago.
I figured you were just there because I got to get your good take on this story as well. The international news, Germany is now instituting border checks amid the European migrant crisis. Germany's interior minister saying that the government will, quote, live up to its humanitarian responsibility, but will begin to impose document checks in an effort that they are calling a signal to the rest of Europe. 40,000 migrants fleeing violence in Syria and Afghanistan were expected to arrive in Germany over this past weekend. Ian, your take on this sad migrant story that has much of Europe on edge at this point.
You know, in the early summer, you and I frequently spoke about the Greece crisis.
That's right.
And I see what the Germans are doing right now is very similar. On the one hand, they're taking a leadership role. On the other hand, they're saying we're not going to do this unless we see more responsibility the way we want from other countries. And they're doing that right before a deal to try to resettle about 160,000 migrants, mostly from the poorer countries, into Germany, into France, into others. They'll get that deal done, and that's a few weeks of migrants. It's a half measure, and it's not ultimately going to respond to this issue. You have millions of refugees, 4 million refugees just from Syria, 2 million of whom are in Turkey. They want to go. They want to go to where they're going to get more benefits, to where they're going to get asylum. And that's what the Germans and other Northern European countries have talked about. This is absolutely going to cause a backlash. It's not an economic crisis. It's not actually that expensive. It's a political crisis.
Does it become an economic crisis?
No, I think it becomes a political crisis. What's going to happen? I mean, you saw what happened with Charlie Hebdo in France.
Right.
8% Muslims in that country. They're not welcome. They're not integrated in most European states. You have the Hungarians, the Slovaks right now saying this is threatening the Christian European way of life. If you have 500, 800,000 asylum seekers in Germany, and God forbid we have the first major terrorist act as a consequence of that, violent spirals, this undermines Merkel. The one thing we've counted on since the 2008 financial crisis in Europe is Merkel has leadership in Europe. The Greek crisis was never going to undermine Merkel. This
could undermine Merkel.
Could absolutely, and I think that's why this is more important.
We're talking about now 1 million people coming in, you know, from Syria and Afghanistan. First it was 800,000 that she's allowing in, now 1 million. Ian, this is some story. I know we're going to be talking about it further with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, guys. Sure.
Ian Bremmer joining us, Eurasia Group. Coming up,